It's not worth continuing. Stop the treatment. My wife said that to the doctor while I was in a coma. There were machines breathing for me, a monitor tracing the fragile rhythm of my heart, a nurse adjusting the IV that fed medication into veins I couldn't feel. And somewhere between the fluorescent hum of the ICU lights and the sterile smell of antiseptic, Lauren asked one question first. How much will this cost if insurance won't cover it? The answer came in numbers. The next words came in something colder than numbers. It's not worth continuing. Stop the treatment. She signed the papers at 2:14 a.m. on a Thursday. I know the exact time because I read it later in the hospital log. When I woke up 3 weeks later, nothing was the same anymore. Not my body, not my marriage, not the woman sitting at my bedside holding my hand like she had almost lost everything. And definitely not me. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 46 years old. I manage operations for a mid-sized construction supply company outside Columbus, Ohio. I've built warehouses, distribution chains, vendor contracts, things that stand upright because someone paid attention to the details. For 20 years, I believed my marriage was one of those things. Lauren and I met when we were 25. She had a laugh that filled rooms and a way of making strangers feel like they had known her forever. She worked in nonprofit fundraising back then, charity galas, silent auctions, handwritten thank you cards. She believed in presentation, in Polish. I believed in stability. We bought our first house when we were 32. 3 bedrooms, beige, siding a maple tree in the front yard that dropped helicopters every spring. We never had children. That was a quiet ache we didn't talk about much. But we had dinners with friends, holidays with her parents, Sunday mornings with coffee on the back deck. From the outside, we looked solid. Inside, something had been shifting for years. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started with small sentences. You don't need to see this. I'll handle the paperwork. Trust me, Ethan. I'm better with this stuff. It's easier if I manage the accounts. I didn't argue. I worked long hours. I came home tired. If Lauren wanted to handle the details, I let her. I told myself that was partnership. But over time, I noticed something subtle. Every conversation about money carried a tone. When my blood pressure medication increased and the copay doubled, she sighed. When my annual physical led to extra cardiac testing, just precautionary, the doctor said she tapped her nails against the kitchen counter and asked, "Is this really necessary?" It wasn't the words, it was the weight behind them. Like I was becoming an expense. Like I was a line item. 3 years ago, after a routine checkup, my physician suggested something practical. You're in good shape overall, Ethan, but we're all one accident away from needing someone to make decisions. Have you set up a healthcare proxy? I hadn't. Lauren squeezed my knee in the exam room. Of course I'd make decisions for him. The doctor nodded. You can list your spouse, or anyone you trust. Anyone you trust. The phrase stuck with me longer than it should have. I thought about Maya Bennett that night. Maya and I had known each other since college. We never dated, never blurred lines. She became a nurse practitioner and stayed in my life through every season. She had a way of looking at facts without flinching. No drama, no panic. When I filled out the proxy form at the clinic a week later, I listed Maya. I didn't tell Lauren. Not because I was planning something, but because I knew deep down that Lauren made decisions emotionally and sometimes financially before medically. It felt like insurance. I filed the copy in my desk drawer at work. The clinic kept theirs. And life moved on. Until the night everything stopped. It was a Tuesday in March. I remember the rain hitting the windshield on my drive home. I remember a sharp pressure behind my eyes, then a strange heaviness in my left arm. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot because something felt wrong. The next memory I have is light. Too bright. Voices layered over each other. Then nothing. They told me later it was a hemorrhagic stroke. Sudden. Severe. My blood pressure had spiked high enough to rupture a small vessel. The kind of event that changes everything in minutes. By 11:40 p.m., I was in surgery. By 1:58 a.m., I was in the ICU unresponsive. At 2:14 a.m., Lauren signed a directive declining further aggressive intervention if my condition worsened. It's not worth continuing. Those words were documented by the attending nurse Nora Alvarez in a note she never expected anyone but hospital administration to read. Lauren didn't visit my room before speaking to billing. She asked about out-of-pocket maximums. She asked about long-term care facilities. She asked what quality of life might realistically look like. The doctor answered carefully. There was risk, there was uncertainty, but there was also possibility. Lauren nodded. Then she made a decision. What she didn't know was that somewhere in the hospital's digital records was a scanned healthcare proxy form with Maya Bennett's name printed clearly under primary decision maker. What she didn't know was that Nora Alvarez was the kind of nurse who read every line before accepting a signature at face value. What she didn't know was that the decision she made at 2:14 a.m. would become the first domino. 3 weeks later, I opened my eyes. The ceiling was a pale institutional white. My throat burned. My body felt like someone had replaced my bones with sandbags. Lauren was there, her hand wrapped around mine, her eyes red. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Ethan, you're back." Back. Like I had gone somewhere inconvenient. I couldn't speak yet. The tube had just been removed hours earlier. My chest ached when I tried to inhale deeply. But I could see. And something in her expression just for a flicker before it rearranged itself was not relief. It was recalculation. I didn't understand it then. I would. Within days, I would learn about the signature. Within weeks, I would discover what else she had signed while I couldn't speak. And within a month, every account she thought she controlled would be under review. Because here's the thing about paperwork. It tells the truth. And I had just woken up. When you come out of a coma, no one hands you a summary. There's no folder labeled, "Here's what happened while you were gone." There's only fragments. A nurse adjusting your pillow. A cup of ice chips pressed to cracked lips. Your wife's voice too careful, too practiced. I spent the first 48 hours trying to remember how to swallow without choking. The next 48 I spent watching Lauren. She never left for long. She sat in the vinyl chair beside my bed with her tablet open typing emails between sympathetic glances at my monitors. Every time a doctor entered the room, she stood up quickly, leaning forward asking questions in a soft, controlled tone. How long before he can return to work? Will he need long-term therapy? What does insurance typically approve in cases like this? The doctors answered cautiously. Recovery would be gradual. Speech therapy, physical therapy, monitoring. Lauren nodded at all the right times. But I noticed something. She never asked, "Is he going to be okay?" She asked about timelines and coverage. On my fourth day awake, Nora Alvarez came in during a quiet shift change. The hallway lights were dimmer. The usual bustle had faded into distant beeps and rolling carts. She pulled the curtain closed. "Ethan," she said gently, "I need to tell you something. And I need you to stay calm." Her voice was steady gravelly from years of 12-hour shifts and cafeteria coffee. I blinked slowly. My throat still hurt when I tried to speak, but I managed a rough, "Okay." "The night you came in," she continued, "your wife made a decision about your care." I watched her eyes. Nurses have a particular look when they're choosing words carefully. She requested we limit aggressive intervention if your condition deteriorated. The sentence sat in the room. She said, "It wasn't worth continuing." The phrase echoed inside my skull like a dropped coin. I stared at the ceiling. Nora didn't rush to fill the silence. "She wasn't your listed proxy," she added quietly. I turned my head slightly. It took effort. "Maya," I croaked. Yes, Nora nodded. "We found the proxy form. I contacted her at 11:32 p.m. She arrived shortly after midnight." A slow, distant warmth spread through my chest. Not comfort, something else. Validation. Lauren hadn't known about the proxy. Nora continued, "Your wife signed paperwork before we caught it." Maya revoked the directive immediately. Authorized continued treatment. I closed my eyes. If Maya hadn't picked up the phone, if Nora hadn't checked the file, if one person had been less thorough, I opened my eyes again. "Is it documented?" I asked. "Everything," Nora replied, time-stamped. She squeezed my hand once and stood, "Rest." After she left, I stared at the IV line taped to my arm. It's strange what your mind focuses on when reality shifts. Not anger. Not panic. Details. I asked for my phone later that afternoon. Lauren hesitated for half a second before handing it over. "You should really focus on healing," she said softly. "I am," I replied. 32 missed emails from my company. 14 from Lauren. 7 notifications from the bank. That caught my attention. I opened the banking app. Password incorrect. I tried again. Incorrect. "Lauren," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "did we change the login?" She didn't look up from her tablet. Oh yeah, after everything happened, I consolidated some accounts. It was just easier. Consolidated. The word felt administrative. Responsible. Easier how? She sighed lightly. Ethan, you were in a coma. I had to think about long-term expenses, mortgage, utilities, medical bills. I moved some things into my primary account so nothing would lapse. Moved what to different, moved what in? Our savings. And I updated some beneficiary information on a few policies. It's temporary. Beneficiary information. I felt something cold slide down my spine. You changed my policies. It's standard, she said quickly. Spouses update things during emergencies all the time. Without me, you weren't exactly available. The room was quiet except for the slow beep of my heart monitor. I watched her face carefully. The Lauren I married used to sit across from me at the kitchen table and talk through every decision. Now she was explaining things after the fact. That night after she left, I called Maya. She answered on the second ring. Ethan. There was no dramatic pause, just relief. You saved me, I said. She exhaled slowly. Nora saved you. I just drove. We spoke quietly while the hallway lights dimmed. Did Lauren seem, I searched for the word, upset? Maya paused. She seemed practical. The word stung more than if she'd said cruel. She asked the surgeon about projected lifetime care costs before she asked about neurological outcomes. I closed my eyes. Ethan, Maya added carefully, I need to tell you something else. Okay. 2 weeks into your coma, I received an automated notification from the insurance company. Your life insurance beneficiary had been updated. My chest tightened. To Lauren, I asked. It was already Lauren. It was changed to a new trust account I'd never heard of. What trust? I don't know. But the change was filed electronically with a digital signature. A digital signature. I thought about the bank app login failing. I thought about passwords. Access. You think she signed as me? I think someone did, Maya said carefully. Silence filled the line. Do you want me to dig, she asked. Yes. There was no hesitation in my voice now. Yes, I want to know everything. After we hung up, I lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling again. I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. There's a moment when the story you've been telling yourself about your life fractures. When the person beside you shifts from partner to variable. Lauren had always valued security, presentation, control. Maybe in her mind she was preparing for a future without me. Maybe she had already stepped into it. But she had made one mistake. She assumed I wouldn't wake up. And now I had. The next morning when Lauren walked into my room with coffee in her hand and that careful softness in her voice, I smiled at her. Not warmly, not coldly, just neutrally. Because while she thought she had been managing the fallout of my illness, I had begun managing something else entirely. Paper trails. And paper trails don't care about performance. They care about signatures. And I intended to read every one of them. Before the stroke, before the ICU lights, before my wife signed anything at 2:14 a.m. There was Harold Sloan. Harold was 72 when I met him, and I was 28 fresh into my role at the supply company. He'd built half the warehouses we serviced. Not with money, he'd started with nothing, but with discipline. He wore the same gray field jacket every fall, carried a leather planner instead of a smartphone, and believed in 3 things above all else: written contracts, clean books, and never signing anything you haven't read twice. He became a mentor the way those relationships usually form quietly. He noticed I stayed late. I noticed he asked better questions than anyone in the room. Numbers don't lie, he told me once over black coffee in a diner off Route 33. But people do. That's why you make the numbers speak for you. He liked Lauren at first. She's sharp, he said after meeting her at a company dinner. Ambitious. He paused before adding, just make sure sharp doesn't turn into cutting. I laughed it off. That was 5 years ago. 2 years ago, Harold called me on a Tuesday evening. His voice was slower than usual. They found something on the scan, he said plainly. Pancreas. It's not good. I drove to his house the next morning. A modest ranch with a deep front porch and wind chimes that never seemed to rest. The living room smelled like lemon polish and old paper. We sat at his kitchen table, no dramatics, no self-pity. I've updated my will, he said. Nothing dramatic, just tidy. I don't need anything from you, I replied quickly. He smiled faintly. That's exactly why you'll get something. I frowned. Harold. Listen, he said, cutting me off gently. You've been decent to me. You showed up when my son didn't. That counts. He slid a manila envelope across the table. I've set up a small trust. Emergency fund. Nothing flashy. But if life ever knocks you sideways, it'll be there. Harold, that's not necessary. It's not about necessary. It's about protection. He leaned back slowly, wincing just slightly. And I've put Graham Kessler in charge of handling it. Independent attorney. Not tied to your company. Not tied to anyone who'd pressure you. Why so formal, I asked. He studied me for a long moment. Because I've watched enough marriages collapse to know this. When one partner falls, the other sometimes reveals who they really are. I didn't like that sentence. I trust Lauren, I said. I'm not questioning that, Harold replied calmly. I'm telling you to trust paper more. He tapped the envelope. If there ever comes a day when you can't speak for yourself physically or legally, let the documents do it. I nodded, though I didn't fully absorb it. He passed 3 months later. The funeral was small. Lauren wore navy blue and cried at all the right moments. She hugged Harold's estranged son in a way that looked rehearsed but sincere enough for photographs. Afterward, I received a call from Graham Kessler's office. Mr. Cole, I'm administering part of Mr. Sloan's estate. He left you listed as a beneficiary of a discretionary trust. Lauren was in the kitchen when I took the call. I put it on speaker. Graham's voice was measured, educated, careful. The trust holds approximately $210,000 earmarked for emergency personal use. There are no conditions, but Mr. Sloan requested all disbursements require your direct authorization in person. Lauren's eyes widened slightly. That's very generous, she said warmly into the phone. Yes, Graham replied. Mr. Sloan was particular about structure. After the call ended, Lauren wrapped her arms around me. Ethan, that's incredible. That gives us security. Wes. At the time, the word felt comforting. Looking back, it feels strategic. We never accessed the trust. There was no reason to. It sat where it was invested, conservatively accumulating quiet interest. Then I had the stroke. 2 weeks into my coma, according to what Graham later told me, someone contacted his office claiming to represent my interests. They said I was incapacitated. They requested preliminary access to trust documentation. The caller identified herself as my wife. She sounded organized, Graham said when I spoke to him from my hospital bed weeks later. Confident. Did you give her anything, I asked? No, he replied. The trust requires your in-person authorization. I informed her of that. Did she push? A little. What did she say? Graham paused. She said she needed to prepare for worst-case scenarios. I let that sentence settle. Worst-case scenarios. 3 weeks earlier at 2:14 a.m., Lauren had said it's not worth continuing. Worst case for whom? Graham continued. She also asked about beneficiary contingencies. My throat tightened. What contingencies? In the event of your death, the trust would default to your named beneficiary. And who was listed, I asked quietly. There was a pause on the line. You updated it last year. I don't remember doing that. You signed an amendment naming Lauren Cole as primary contingent beneficiary. I closed my eyes. Can you send me a copy? I'd prefer to review it with you in person, Graham said evenly. There are irregularities. Irregularities. The word hung heavy. Such as I pressed. The signature doesn't perfectly match your previous documents. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with recovery. You think it's forged? I think it warrants review. I hung up and stared at the hospital ceiling for a long time. Harold's voice echoed in my memory. When one partner falls, the other sometimes reveals who they really are. I thought about the bank login, the beneficiary changes, the quiet consolidation of accounts. Lauren hadn't just prepared for my recovery, she had prepared for my absence. And somewhere in a file cabinet or digital archive was a document that either protected me or betrayed me. The next step wasn't confrontation, it was confirmation. Because Harold had been right. When you can't speak, paper speaks for you. And I intended to hear exactly what mine was saying. The strange thing about betrayal is that it rarely feels explosive at first. It feels administrative. By the time I was moved out of ICU and into a step-down room, I could sit upright without the room spinning. My left side still felt heavier than it should. My speech dragged at the edges. But my mind was clear enough to notice patterns. Lauren brought in my laptop on my sixth day awake. You'll get restless, she said, gently placing it on the overbed tray. Maybe check emails. Ease back in. She had already logged me in. That detail didn't escape me. The browser history was open. Tabs for the insurance portal, two separate bank dashboards, a document management site I recognized from Graham's firm. I closed the screen without comment. Later that afternoon, Nora returned. She shut the door quietly behind her and pulled the rolling stool close to my bed. There's more, she said. My pulse ticked up slightly on the monitor. The directive your wife signed wasn't just about aggressive intervention, she continued. It also included a preliminary request for a long-term comfort care consultation. I frowned. That's hospice. Yes. I stared at her. At 2:14 a.m., she said softly, she signed paperwork indicating that if neurological recovery appeared limited, she would not pursue extended rehabilitation. I swallowed carefully, but it wasn't limited. No, Nora said firmly. Your initial scans showed promise. We communicated that. So she knew. Yes. The room felt smaller suddenly. Nora folded her hands in her lap. Ethan, I'm not here to judge your marriage. I'm here because when a patient has a proxy on file and the spouse attempts to override it without disclosure, that matters. Was she trying to override it, I asked. She didn't disclose it existed. The distinction landed hard. Lauren hadn't technically broken hospital rules. She had omitted information, intentionally. And she asked the billing department about long-term care facilities before Maya arrived, Nora added quietly. She specifically inquired about projected monthly costs. I let out a slow breath. There it was again. Costs. Line items. What would have happened, I asked slowly, if Maya hadn't been reachable? Nora didn't answer immediately. We would have followed the directive on file. I nodded once. The simplicity of it chilled me more than any raised voice could have. Paperwork. Signatures. Timestamps. That night, after Lauren left with a kiss pressed carefully to my forehead, I reopened my laptop. The bank account login had been updated, but my email still allowed password recovery access. I reset the credentials. 3 savings transfers totaling $62,000 had moved into an account I didn't recognize. The account name L. Cole Holdings. Not our joint account. Not our mortgage account. A separate LLC. I opened the insurance portal next. The beneficiary on my primary life insurance policy had been changed from Lauren individually to L. Cole Holdings, LLC. I stared at the screen. If I had died under that directive, the payout wouldn't have gone directly to my spouse. It would have gone into a corporate structure under her control. Structured. Insulated. Less visible. My heart monitor ticked steadily beside me. I called Maya. She formed an LLC, I said without greeting. For what? To receive the insurance payout. Silence. Ethan, Maya said slowly, that's premeditated planning. I was still alive. I know. I forwarded her the screenshots. She responded within minutes. Call Graham. It was after 9 p.m., but I called anyway. He answered. I've reviewed the trust amendment, he said before I even spoke. The digital signature is inconsistent with your prior filings. How inconsistent? The pressure pattern is wrong. The timestamp places the signing at 3:07 a.m., the same night you were admitted. I felt the air leave my lungs. 3 hours after surgery, I whispered. Yes. I was intubated. Yes. Silence filled the line. She attempted to update the trust beneficiary to her LLC. Graham continued evenly. But the amendment requires two-factor identity confirmation. The system flagged irregular login attempts and locked it before final validation. I closed my eyes. She tried to move the trust. She tried to prepare for your death, Graham corrected gently. The words were clinical, not emotional. And that made them worse. Can we freeze it, I asked. It was never fully altered. But yes, I've already placed a temporary administrative hold pending review. I thought about the hospital room. The fourth line. The woman who had sat beside me whispering, you scared me. You need to understand something, Graham added carefully. Attempted beneficiary fraud combined with financial consolidation while the primary account holder is incapacitated is legally significant. Is it criminal? It depends on intent and documentation, but it is actionable. Actionable. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger. Resolve. Lauren returned the next morning with a smoothie and a warm smile. "You look better," she said. "I am," I replied evenly. She adjusted the blanket at my waist. "I've been thinking," she said softly. "Once you're discharged, maybe we simplify things. Transfer most of the accounts under my management permanently. It's just safer." "Safer." "For whom?" I asked. She paused. "For us." I held her gaze. "I'd like to review everything myself first." Her smile flickered. "Of course," she said lightly. "When you're stronger." "I'm stronger now." The room went quiet. For a fraction of a second I saw it. Not fear. Calculation. She leaned in and kissed my cheek. "Let's focus on healing," she said. "Money can wait." But money had never waited. It had moved at 3:07 a.m. It had moved at 2:14 a.m. It had moved while I couldn't speak. The difference now was simple. I could, and every document she thought was buried in urgency was still traceable. Because while Lauren believed she had prepared for my death, she had underestimated my recovery. And she had underestimated the permanence of digital footprints. The next move wouldn't be emotional. It would be documented. And I was almost ready. They discharged me on a gray Monday morning. Lauren arrived at 9:10 a.m., precisely when the nurse said I'd be ready. She carried my overnight bag and a bouquet of white lilies, which she placed on the windowsill, like a photograph opportunity. "You're coming home," she said softly, brushing her fingers along my shoulder. "We'll get back to normal." Normal. I nodded and let her wheel me through the lobby. The sliding glass doors opened to cool spring air. For a moment, the sunlight felt almost disorienting. 3 weeks inside, fluorescent lighting changes the way you see color. The sky looked too blue, the parking lot too sharp. Lauren drove. She talked the entire way home about neighbors who had sent casseroles, about how frightening it had been to sit alone in waiting rooms, about how she had barely slept. She never mentioned 2:14 a.m. She never mentioned the LLC. She never mentioned the attempted trust amendment at 3:07 a.m. When we pulled into the driveway, the maple tree in the front yard had already begun dropping new buds. The house looked the same. It wasn't. Inside, I noticed subtle differences. The home office desk was cleared of my usual stacks of paperwork. The filing cabinet, always slightly crooked, had been straightened. "Too straight." "I reorganized," Lauren said lightly when she saw me looking around. "While you were gone, it felt productive." I smiled faintly. Productive. That afternoon, she insisted I rest. She went to the grocery store, leaving me alone in the house for the first time since the stroke. I didn't lie down. I walked slowly to the office. My balance wasn't perfect yet. My left leg still lagged slightly behind my right, but I moved carefully, gripping the edge of the desk as needed. The filing cabinet was locked. Lauren had never locked it before. I found the spare key taped inside the back of the bottom drawer, a habit I'd started years ago. Inside were 3 folders labeled in her handwriting. State, insurance, and operations. I pulled out estate first. The trust amendment sat neatly clipped on top. My name typed cleanly at the signature line. Below it, an electronic signature. My signature. Except it wasn't. The E curved slightly too sharply. The downward stroke on the T was too heavy. Anyone glancing quickly might not notice, but I had signed my name thousands of times. This wasn't mine. Behind it was the LLC registration paperwork. L. Cole Holdings, LLC. Registered 2 weeks into my coma. Purpose listed as financial management and asset structuring. Asset structuring. I sat down slowly in the desk chair. The timing aligned perfectly. 2:14 a.m. directive signed. 3:07 a.m. trust amendment attempted. 2 weeks later, LLC established. If the directive had held, if Maya hadn't intervened, within days, Lauren would have controlled my life insurance payout, Harold's trust funds, our consolidated savings, the house which was solely in my name. I closed the folder carefully and returned it exactly as I found it. No confrontation. Not yet. Instead, I called Graham. "I have the documents," I said quietly. And he asked, "It's forged." I assumed as much. "What's the next step?" "First, we preserve evidence. Do not remove or alter anything. I'll file a formal notice of disputed amendment with the trust administrator. Second, we alert the insurance carrier's fraud department. And the LLC, that will require a separate review. If it was formed with intent to redirect assets under false pretenses, it becomes legally significant. Criminal, I asked. Potentially. The word felt heavy. Not because I wanted Lauren arrested, but because I wanted clarity. After we ended the call, I contacted the insurance carrier directly. I kept my voice steady. This is Ethan Cole. I'd like to verify recent beneficiary changes. The representative placed me on hold. When she returned, her tone shifted. Mr. Cole, I see a pending update to an LLC entity filed during your hospitalization. However, it is currently flagged for identity verification. I did not authorize that change, I said clearly. I'll document that immediately, she replied. Within minutes, I received an email confirming the beneficiary status was frozen pending investigation. One piece secured. Next, I logged into the bank's fraud portal. The transfers into L. Cole Holdings were still visible in transaction history. The account itself required separate login credentials which Lauren controlled, but the transfers originated from our joint savings. I flagged each transaction as unauthorized. The automated system acknowledged receipt. I then contacted the bank's fraud department and requested a formal review based on incapacitation at the time of transfer. The representative's voice sharpened. Mr. Cole, were you medically incapacitated during these transfers? Yes. Do you have documentation? I do. We will temporarily freeze the receiving account pending investigation. Freeze. I leaned back in the chair. That word mattered. Because for weeks, Lauren had been moving pieces across the board assuming I was gone. Now the board had stopped. I returned to the bedroom before she came home. When Lauren walked in carrying grocery bags, she smiled. You're up. That's progress. I made a few calls, I said calmly. She paused slightly. What kind of calls? Insurance, the bank, Graham. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Why, she asked lightly. I wanted to understand our finances. We talked about this, she replied, setting the bags down carefully. You're not ready to handle stress. I'm ready to handle my name, I said quietly. Silence filled the kitchen. You don't trust me, she asked. It wasn't accusation. It was strategy. I'm verifying, I said evenly. Her jaw tightened slightly. That's insulting. No, I replied, it's responsible. She studied me for a long moment. You were unconscious, she said softly. I did what I thought was necessary. For whose benefit? For ours. Ours, I repeated. She didn't answer. Later that night, after she went to bed, my phone buzzed. An email from the bank. Subject account freeze confirmation. L. Cole Holdings, LLC, temporary suspension of access pending fraud review. I stared at the screen in the dark bedroom. Lauren shifted beside me in her sleep. She didn't know yet, but by morning she would. And for the first time since the stroke, I felt something close to control. Not vengeance. Not triumph. Control. Because paper trails don't argue. They don't cry. They don't perform. They simply record. And Lauren had left a very clear record. The next step wouldn't happen in our kitchen. It would happen somewhere public. Somewhere she felt secure. Somewhere she believed her version of the story would go unchallenged. She had built her reputation carefully. I intended to test how strong it really was. Lauren found out about the freeze at 8:17 the next morning. I know the exact time because her phone vibrated on the nightstand and she reached for it before her alarm even went off. She sat up slowly reading. Her shoulders stiffened. What is this? She asked, not looking at me. What does it say? I replied evenly. She turned the screen toward me. Account access suspended pending fraud review. She blinked once, then again, like the words might rearrange themselves if she waited long enough. This has to be a mistake, she said sharply, swinging her legs out of bed. I contacted the bank yesterday, I told her calmly. I flagged the transfers. You what? I was medically incapacitated when those funds were moved. Her head snapped toward me. You're accusing me of something. I'm documenting something. Her breathing quickened. That money was for security, she said. For us, in case. In case I died, I finished. She didn't answer. The silence said enough. I didn't know if you'd wake up, she said, finally, voice trembling, just enough to feel rehearsed. I had to think ahead. You thought ahead at 3:07 a.m., I said quietly, when you attempted to change the trust beneficiary. Her face drained of color. I don't know what you're talking about. Graham does. The name landed hard. You spoke to him, she demanded. Yes. You went behind my back. No, I replied. I went to the attorney assigned to a trust in my name. Her jaw tightened. You're making this into something it isn't. Then explain the signature. She stared at me. The performance faltered. It was digital, she said. Maybe the system glitched. Digital signatures don't glitch into different handwriting patterns. The room went very still. She stood up abruptly and walked toward the bathroom. You're not thinking clearly, she called through the doorway. You just survived a stroke. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the moment settle. Deflection. Doubt. Minimization. It was all predictable. By noon, Graham had filed formal notice with the trust administrator declaring the amendment fraudulent pending investigation. By 1:40 p.m., the insurance carrier confirmed my beneficiary status had reverted to its prior form until identity verification was complete. By 3:15 p.m., Diane Park from the bank's fraud department called me directly. Mr. Cole, she said professionally, we've reviewed the timeline. Transfers were initiated while you were listed as hospitalized and unresponsive. That raises compliance concerns. Understood. The receiving LLC was registered during the same period. Yes. We will maintain the freeze until identity authentication is completed in person. Thank you. I hung up and leaned back in my chair. Lauren stood in the doorway watching me. You're humiliating me, she said quietly. I haven't told anyone, I replied. You don't have to. Once banks start freezing accounts, people notice. Her voice cracked slightly. Not from sadness, from exposure. You structured an LLC to receive a life insurance payout, I said evenly, while I was intubated. You don't know what that feels like, she snapped suddenly, watching doctors shake their heads hearing them talk about probabilities. They were optimistic, I interrupted. Nora told you that. Lauren froze. You talked to the nurse. Yes. Her expression hardened. She had no right. She documented everything. The air shifted. Her anger cooled into calculation again. What do you want? She asked quietly. The question surprised me. I want the truth. I did what I thought was necessary. For you, I corrected. For us, she insisted. Then why didn't you tell me? She hesitated. Because you would have overreacted. I almost laughed. I was unconscious. She didn't respond. The next move required precision. Lauren had built her public image carefully over 15 years. Charity boards, fundraising galas, a seat on the advisory committee for a local healthcare nonprofit. She was hosting their annual spring benefit in 6 days. 200 attendees, major donors, press coverage from the local paper. She would stand at a podium and talk about compassion, about stewardship, about ethical leadership. I called Graham that evening. I want everything documented by Saturday, I said. It will be, he replied. And I want you present. He paused. At the event? Yes. Ethan, he said carefully, are you certain that's necessary? She operates in controlled environments, I replied. I'm choosing one. There was a long silence. Understood, Graham said finally. I'll bring copies of every filing. I ended the call and sat quietly in the darkened office. Lauren believed I would confront her privately. Argue. Threaten divorce. Break down. Instead, I was organizing. The same way I'd managed supply chains and contracts for 20 years. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about record. And once a record exists, it changes perception permanently. Lauren entered the office doorway. You're still planning to attend Saturday, she asked. Yes. You'll be exhausted. I'll manage. She studied me carefully. You don't have to make a scene. I'm not planning a scene. What are you planning? I looked at her steadily. Clarity. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You're going to embarrass me. I'm going to speak. She held my gaze for several long seconds. Then she turned and walked away without another word. 6 days earlier, she had believed my life was nearing an end. Now the structure she had built in anticipation of that end was under review. Frozen. Examined. And soon exposed. Because here's the thing about control. It works best in silence. And silence was no longer available to her. Saturday would not be dramatic. It would be measured. Documented. Final. And for the first time since 2:14 a.m., I felt entirely awake. The ballroom at the Riverside Convention Center smelled like polished wood and expensive perfume. Round tables draped in white linen filled the room. Crystal water glasses caught the chandelier light. A banner near the stage read, Compassion in Action Annual Spring Benefit. Lauren had chaired this event for 4 years. She stood near the podium when I walked in navy dress, fitted perfectly hair pinned with effortless precision. She smiled at donors, shook hands, touched arms lightly when she laughed. She looked radiant. I moved slower than usual. My gait still carried the faint stiffness of recovery, but I walked without assistance. A few board members greeted me warmly. "Ethan, we're so glad you're recovering. So grateful you're here." Lauren spotted me from across the room. Her smile didn't fade, but it tightened. "You made it," she said as I approached. I said I would. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Let's not do this here. Do what I asked calmly. Whatever you think you're about to do." I held her gaze. "I'm here to listen." She studied my face for a moment, searching for something: anger, volatility, uncertainty. She didn't find it. At 7:45 p.m., the lights dimmed slightly and the event program began. A short video played showcasing patient testimonials. Applause followed. Then Lauren stepped up to the podium. She adjusted the microphone. Her voice carried clearly through the room. "Good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight. Healthcare is about dignity. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves." The irony felt almost physical. She spoke eloquently about ethical responsibility, about stewardship of funds, about making decisions rooted in compassion. And sometimes she added gently, "We are called to make difficult choices for those we love." My pulse remained steady. At 8:02 p.m., she concluded her speech to warm applause. The event coordinator approached her, whispering something about the live auction. Lauren nodded and stepped down from the podium. I stood. The movement alone drew attention. 200 people had just watched me nearly die via whispered updates weeks earlier. Now I was upright. I walked toward the stage. Lauren's eyes followed me. "Ethan," she murmured under her breath as I passed. "Don't." I stepped up beside the podium. "I won't take long," I said into the microphone. The room quieted immediately. "I want to thank everyone here for their support during my hospitalization." Polite nods, soft smiles. "There's something I need to clarify. Not as a husband, not as a patient, but as someone whose medical and financial decisions were made recently." Lauren stood very still. "I was unconscious for 3 weeks," I continued evenly. "During that time, certain directives were signed regarding my care, and certain financial structures were established in anticipation of my death." A ripple of confusion moved through the room. I didn't raise my voice. "I want to be clear about one thing. My healthcare proxy was not my spouse. It was filed years ago with someone else. That fact was not disclosed the night a directive limiting my treatment was signed." Murmurs. Lauren stepped forward slightly. "Ethan," she said quietly, "this isn't appropriate." "I'll be finished in a moment," I replied calmly. I turned slightly toward the audience. Additionally, during my hospitalization, a limited liability company was formed to receive potential life insurance benefits. A trust amendment was attempted at 3:07 a.m. while I was intubated. The room fell silent. Not uncomfortable. Stunned. Right on cue, Graham Kessler entered from the side of the ballroom. He didn't hurry. He walked steadily toward the stage carrying a slim leather briefcase. I nodded toward him. "This is Graham Kessler, the independent attorney overseeing a trust established by my late mentor." Graham stepped beside me. "Good evening," he said calmly. "All statements made are documented in filed records currently under review by the appropriate institutions." Lauren's face had lost its color entirely. "This is absurd," she said, turning to the audience. "He's been through trauma. He's confused." Graham opened the briefcase and removed a thin folder. "Digital signature analysis and banking compliance reviews have already been initiated," he stated evenly. "The receiving account associated with Elcol Holdings, LLC, is presently frozen pending investigation." A quiet gasp rose from somewhere near the front tables. Lauren's breath caught audibly. "This is a private matter," she insisted. "It became public when directives were signed without disclosure," I replied softly. I didn't accuse. I didn't insult. I simply presented facts. Lauren looked around the room. These were her donors, her colleagues, her carefully cultivated network. They weren't looking at her with admiration now. They were looking with caution. I turned back to the microphone. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," I said calmly. "I'm here to state that I am alive, that I did not authorize those financial or trust amendments, and that documentation matters." I stepped back. Graham closed the folder. The event coordinator stood frozen near the stage curtain. Lauren attempted to speak again, but her voice didn't project. The room's energy had shifted completely. No shouting, no spectacle, just awareness. Within 24 hours, the nonprofit board requested a temporary leave of absence from Lauren pending internal review. Within 48 hours, the bank extended its freeze until completion of a full fraud audit. Within 72 hours, the insurance carrier formally voided the attempted beneficiary change. Lauren moved into the guest room. We barely spoke. There was no dramatic confrontation afterward. Just distance, paperwork, meetings, quiet legal consultations. 3 weeks later, she asked for a separation. I didn't argue, because the truth had already done what it needed to do. 1 month after the gala, I visited Harold's old house. The porch swing creaked in the wind. I sat there for a long time. I thought about 2:14 a.m., about 3:07 a.m., about how close silence had come to defining my life permanently. Setting a boundary isn't revenge. It's survival. Speaking isn't cruelty. It's clarity. If you've ever been made to feel like a line item in someone else's life, like your existence was weighed against cost, hear this clearly. You are not an expense. You are not a projection. And you do not owe anyone your silence. If this story resonated with you, I want to know. What boundary have you set that changed everything? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. We share stories like this every day, stories about clarity, courage, and quiet strength. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Let's keep this journey going together.